I mean, my first reaction was, this is a nightmare scenario. Especially for Syria, which is coming out of more than a decade of ongoing conflicts. We travel regularly to Syria, and we see the lack of infrastructure. We see the lack of response capacity in the hospitals and medical centers, the lack of sanitation capacity. We've been responding to a cholera outbreak in Syria since last year. And there's been a winter storm all last week with freezing conditions. So when I heard the full scale of the earthquake and where it happened, it was a mix of exactly what you don't want to happen. It's probably one of the largest responses we'll have in the last 10, 15 years as an international organization. In Beirut, I was jolted awake by the earthquake, and my house was shaking, and Beirut is hundreds and hundreds of miles away from the epicenter was. So to feel it and to wake up and to run into the street in Beirut, and then to imagine how much stronger it would have been in Turkey and northern Syria is incredibly horrific.
Absolutely. Do you know kind of much about what's going on the ground at the moment?
Yeah, so I mean, from the first moments of the response, both the communities are always the first responders in any crisis, but our local volunteers who live and are in those communities had been doing search and rescue from the very beginning. Ambulance crews, both the Syrian Red Crescent and the Turkish Red Crescent, responded immediately. Straight away, emergency operations centers were set up, and trying to understand the scale and the immediate needs was the first priority. Search and rescue has been our number one priority for the last 36 hours. Obviously, we're now coming to a point where that's transitioning to more of a focus on the living and ensuring that we have more kind of ongoing support for the survivors of this. We're now entering the third night. Obviously, this happened in the early hours 2 nights ago, and temperatures dropped below freezing. So search and rescue is continuing, but at the same time, we're also prioritizing ensuring that survivors have a safe place to sleep, that they have somewhere warm, that they have a mattress, that they have a blanket. We've mobilized thousands and thousands of blankets. More than 200 trucks from different parts of Turkey have arrived in the areas to distribute goods. In Syria, the Red Crescent has mobilized their pre-positioned disaster stocks to reach people in need. But the scale of this is such that we're not going to meet everyone in the immediate response, and so we're doing our best. We're working with other humanitarian organizations, but we know that the scale is massive. And for us as British Red Cross, with our staff in Syria and with our partner organizations on the ground, we want to do as much as we can to support them. And we've launched an appeal to do that, and people can support at redcross.org.uk.
What is kind of the response, the immediate response when something as catastrophic as this happens from groups like the Red Cross? Is it kind of a case of there's been lots of preparation done so things are kind of ready to go and support as quickly as possible?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as British Red Cross, we've been working with the Syrian Red Crescent since 2004, doing disaster management response capacity training, supporting with the establishment of warehouses with pre-positioned stock, to ensure that we have immediate response capacity when something like this happens. And that, is something that's extremely useful because we've had a whole lot of well-trained volunteers in Aleppo, in Hama, in the areas that were badly hit, who were able to respond incredibly quickly. We have our standard operating procedures that we mobilize in a response like this. But of course, the scale is it's incredibly next level. And so we, are in what we call the immediate response phase, which is the first 72 hours, which is really about saving lives, trying to get people out of rubble, trying to get people to emergency medical centers, trying to get blood units sent to frontline hospitals and medical centers as quickly as possible. And then in the coming days, we're going to transition to developing the planning for the medium to long-term recovery, which will encompass things like ensuring people have access to life-saving medicines that they might have left at home when they ran out of the building. It'll include supporting longer-term recovery for people who might now have a lifelong injury and might not be able to return to their job or their livelihood. It'll include psychosocial support for people who've been heavily traumatized, especially young children who've just gone through a life-altering event, many of whom might have lost family members, and ensuring that they're getting psychosocial support to deal with that and to recover, and other people who are vulnerable and who need that to address those wounds that we often don't see. And of course, we have a huge displaced population at the moment, a lot of people who have no house to return to, who are in sub-zero temperatures and who need safe accommodation. And it's going to take months and months and months for these cities to rebuild in Turkey. I mean, when we talk about Turkey and Syria, we're also talking about two very different contexts. Turkey is much more of a well-resourced, organized country. In Syria, we still have whole cities that are lying in rubble, and so that kind of return to safe accommodation is going to be a much longer challenge for Syria than Turkey, but for both contexts, incredibly difficult.
So, another thing you have touched on was the fact that British people can help people at home, here. What exactly can people do to help?
Sure. I mean, firstly, to say we've been really impressed, and it's been really amazing to see the generous support from people already. We've had a very positive response to the appeal that we launched only yesterday, and in these kinds of scenarios, people want to donate goods. People, they call us up and they want to donate things, and often, especially in the early stages of response, that can actually complicate things and that can slow things down. We're seeing in Turkey a lot of people trying to drive to the areas to donate items, and it's clogging the roads for search and rescuers to get there. But we know that as a British organization, the best thing that we can do is raise funds and send technical experts, and that's what we're doing right now. So redcross.org.uk is where you can donate. That money, we've already sent money across. We have an emergency disaster fund that we've already mobilized for Syria for emergency needs. That money will also be used for ongoing recovery, for safe places to stay, for food, but also for livelihood recovery, also for psychosocial, recovery. Our bread and butter is natural disasters, and we know that, these continue long after international interest has kind of died down. And so we're here to stay for the long haul, and we're building our plan to make sure that we're saving lives now, supporting recovery, and also promoting human dignity in the long term. So if you want to donate, redcross.org.uk is the best place to do that. It's very easy, it's very quick, and that money goes to supporting survivors in both Turkey and Syria.
The other thing you kind of touched on as well was that about the scale and the kind of long-lasting impact. So is there kind of anything, have we seen in this region kind of anything like this before of this scale? And exactly how long lasting an impact could we expect to see as a result of this?
We're talking years. To be very frank, I think especially in Syria, it's a much more complicated dynamic because of limitations to get things into the country, because of the complexities around the current government in Syria, and so I think especially in Syria, we're talking for years and potentially years to get back to a point of where communities were before the crisis, which wasn't at a very high point to begin with. In Turkey, we're probably looking at months to years. I'm sitting here in Beirut at the moment, not too far from the port that exploded, and I can still see rubble around me. We still have buildings that are still being recovered more than 2 years after the blast. So, it was several years. And of course, that's just the physical side of it. For people who are affected, that's often a lifelong, life-altering event that they've just gone through. Loss of family members, loss of loved ones, mental health impacts, physical disabilities. These are all kind of lifelong impacts for people. So in terms of ensuring people have access to food and accommodation, the real basics of life, we're expecting that to last months, and then transitioning to real recovery. That's a time scale of several years.
And the last thing really is, obviously you've spoken a bit about the issues that have kind of been going on in Syria. As we see governments kind of from around the world respond, maybe send aid, help, and organizations like Red Cross and other organizations, do you think maybe there would be hesitance might be the wrong word, but a difference in aid that maybe goes to Turkey compared to what goes with Syria?
I think, as an independent and neutral and non-aligned organization, our priority is always to advocate for, equal humanitarian access to everyone. We know that we work in incredibly complex places and we work in complex scenarios, but that's why we always work through the same fundamental principles of our international organization, so that everywhere you see us working, we work with neutrality, we work with impartiality, we work through volunteers, And you know, we'll be working and liaising with governments, encourage them to give generously through us, knowing that we are an entity that is independent, and that our support goes directly to the people most affected.